All right, we're back once again, the Think Fitness Life podcast. This week, we're talking nutritional tweaks, a little nutritional biochemistry, and the tips that we've learned and read about and implemented in our practice and with our clients. And before we get started, I know Eric's got some news for us.
So the study of Baylor College of Medicine released a couple of days ago, a week ago. So the summary a multi-institutional team reveals a previously unknown gut-brain connection that helps explain how these extra servings of food lead to weight gain. So perfect. I was like, awesome. Let me read this stuff because I'm always about the gut and the brain, that access. Some people say it's a big one. Some people say it doesn't really exist. Anyways, they had mice consuming high-fat diet, so your standard Western American diet, and they're measuring the levels of, it's called GIP, G-I-P, or GIP, gastric inhibitory polypeptide, which in short is a hormone produced in the gut that is involved in managing the body's energy balance. So they're trying to find what's going on, what does this hormone do, how does it throw it off? The interesting thing it says, and read the research, there's a lot of good stuff and studies, but they came out and said that with the standard poor dietary and the high fat, the gut actually produces this polypeptide and upregulates it and pushes it into the blood. Now, these are one of these polypeptides that's looking at kind of breaking that blood-brain barrier, and it's getting into the brain, and it's actually inhibiting leptin, which for all of our listeners, leptin is the hormone that's going to basically say, hey, we're done, we're full capacity. So now this GIP, or this polypeptide, is inhibiting leptin, or the brain, the hypothalamus, from releasing signals to the brain to say, hey, we're full. Now they're seeing increased weight gain, a lot of gut problems, health problems, obese. This all is being done, studied in mice, but mice are very similar, but a little bit different. So you expect the same thing to happen in our systems.
Did it talk about how the GIP is initiated or created, or?
So there's natural levels of this polypeptide in our system. So I have it, you have it. There's receptors. The problem is when you eat an unbalanced diet, these levels
increase.
Yeah, they increase tenfold, and then it throws off the balance of leptin. Brain doesn't trigger. Now you have that axis of gut brain not talking to each other, or one's trying to upregulate, the other one's trying to figure out what to do, and there's nothing happening. So they're now they're going to.
It almost sounds like a hijacking system.
Essentially, it is. It's, once you get to the brain,
it's basically like something coming in and kind of hijacking the fuel source and then telling it to keep the fuel coming.
So you're never getting leptin to be released, or enough amount of it to have an effect of your body be like, we're full. So people, along with all the other food we're eating and the bad bacteria that's trying to keep driving some decisions, we're basically driving a system to become energy inefficient and just keep on packing the energy in. The interesting thing they found, and this is kind of gets into some neurophysiology work, is they block the interaction of this GIP, this polypeptide, with the hypothalamus of obese mice, and it restored the leptin's ability to inhibit appetite, and they saw reduced body weight. So I don't want to go as much as saying that they're going to develop this new technique to help you lose weight. They could. It's more likely to be probably a brain function rather than a pill that you're going to take, because it's more, you got to block the interaction. Because if you're eating a poor diet and you're trying to take this pill that might shut down, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's interesting because I guess one thing to go further to just make sure you cover all your bases is like, okay, well, does blocking the GIP particle that stops it from um, telling me I'm full, so that now I can actually get satiated by the food I eat. Um, but will blocking it have other side effects? Like, will the molecule bind to something else, or will it end up somewhere else that it shouldn't be, or you know what I mean? So something else. You got to always kind of ask, what's the next step here? Like, you guys got to always kind of dig further. So it
Yes.
is really interesting that they could easily develop a drug to help somebody. But I
And it,
think if you want to do it the right way, like you said, you just adjust your diet, because a lot of what happens when you tip the scales towards, unfortunately, things that taste really good and taste really sweet and fattening, half the time they're not the best for us, and it's basically like bad bacteria hijacking signals to your brain to keep eating the bad stuff. And one of the founding fathers of this whole fitness industry, Jack LaLanne, said, "If it tastes good, spit it out." But this little funny nomenclature.
no,
But
and I'm
yeah,
glad you brought up the questioning, because that's usually the first thing people should think of when you're taking some sort of drug or medication. Is there's always a trickle down effect. There's always, if you take something away in the process of the body, somewhere down the line something has to change to adapt and try to fix that what you did. So maybe people listening saying, "Oh, this is going to be great." I don't think this is going to be a medication, an oral medication. To me, this more sounds like, hey, they're going to put, this might be like brain surgery, but to the point where,
what?
well, yeah. So if you're thinking of this is, and this is where it gets cool, is if it's a brain issue, it's a hypothalamus issue. You're
Well, how'd they block it in the mice? Because that's the real question.
all
If
right.
they blocked it with
It says
drugs in the mice, then they're trying to make a drug for humans.
infusing directly into the brain a monoclonal antibody. So essentially, if it's a drug, it has to go through the brain, because if you, the tough thing is with the brain is a lot of things can't get through the blood brain barrier. So if you take a drug and it's trying to do a lot, but sometimes the drugs don't even get across it. So now you might get a little effect, not a big effect. With the brain, you kind of have to go antibodies, direct stimulation through either, electromagnetic or other ways to really change and regulate the areas of the brain. So it's going to be interesting, what they kind of make of it. I don't think it will be a consumer thing. There's a lot more research, but now they kind of know, okay, the
That
gut is
that
telling
that's
this,
right.
the brain is the brain is a big issue. So it's more of creating different behaviors and like we said, eating a healthy, balanced diet. Because you could take all the weight loss stuff in the world, but if you don't fix the hormones regulation or the brain's regulation of the hormones, nothing really is going to change. Like, you can stop it, but you have to almost like hard reset everything in the brain, and
Yeah,
that's what
like
they're saying this tries to do.
if you're out of balance with the level of that inhibitor, then you're always going to be not satisfied by the food you're eating. And you're going to always have a need to have to block that receptor. And blocking that receptor fixes that. And that's a great little test for us to learn what's causing the behavior. That's not the solution yet, I guess, is the point of the article.
And if we want to control this gastric inhibitory polypeptide, take control of what you're eating, take control of what you're putting into your body, because we know that that's how we can regulate. Drugs won't be able to regulate. We have to regulate ourselves. But I did feel it was a great article to kind of get people aware of. There's this giant axis between our head and our gut, and a lot of what's in our head, the matter between our ears, controls our actions and controls our decisions. And they talk. Everything talks back and forth to each other. Things upregulate and downregulate, and kind of fitting to what we're going to kind of talk to today about getting into tweaks and healthy tips to get you onto this well balanced diet and away from this American standard diet where it's high fat, high carbohydrates, high sugar, high sugary fluids, which is at the end of the day is really hurting our system, and it is not good.
Yeah, it does remind me though of because you talked about the hormone ghrelin, right, for satiating hunger.
Leptin.
Leptin. Okay, never mind. Different
Ghrelin's
study.
going to make you hungry. Leptin will shut it down.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So another study it reminded me of was that they had two shakes and two groups, and one of the shakes was named something that referenced health, and the other shake was something that referenced like chocolate milk or like something more indulgent. And the group that had like the health drink released ghrelin much quicker than the other group. So, but different hormone, but just kind of how mindset played a role there. But
Different
yeah,
hormone, but you're talking other side of the road, metabolic pathway,
right,
which is
exactly,
very important. So it's just
exactly.
you're going down leptin, ghrelin's the opposite. There shows you that there can be a huge effect of that
Just
study.
by changing one of those
Correct.
concentrations in the body system. Yeah, well, kind of perfect to segue into the first nutrition tip with I mentioned Jack LaLanne, and he's kind of the godfather of fitness. And I think this nutrition tip would be kind of like a foundation to uh, the health and fitness world, which is bodybuilding. And a lot of competitors use it as a way to show better definition, pull fat and glycogen, or not glycogen, but pull fat and the tissue away from covering the muscle, so it uncovers it and allows for better look when you flex, so that people would be preparing for the stage. And it's carb cycling. So just the idea of having higher carb days, low carb days, and medium carb days to spike your metabolic rate and then kind of pull the rug out from underneath it, introduce a lower amount of carbohydrates, but keep that high metabolic rate. Because we all know that if we just lessen our calories, our caloric expenditure will also drop. So in the opposite, if we kind of skyrocket our metabolism real quick by throwing a lot of calories at it and making it work, that's going to have to burn more calories. But then when you pull out, you don't give enough time to drop down its caloric expenditure, so you end up burning more calories, and by tricking your body in the carb cycling.
I think that's a great one that a lot of people either don't know about or don't know how to properly execute that. And there's so many different variations that you can do
And
it.
each body's different, whether you're mesomorph, ectomorph, or endomorph. If you store fats easier or make muscle easier, or it's harder for you to do either one of those, then that's going to kind of adjust how you have to do it. And to that being said, everyone's body is, like a fingerprint essentially, that they might be better on high fat diets, right? They might be better without carbs at all. Others do better with carbs. And it's just dependent on each individual, and trying your meals out and then getting normalized and then flexing it both ways on the low end and the high end.
And I would say let's first break it down per day. So sometimes I don't know. I mean, you might have a completely different tactic or tweaks than I do for this one. Sometimes, so I'll tell if you have a heavy lifting day, very high strength training, resistance training, and you have a day in between that's maybe a cardiovascular day or an aerobic day or more of a conditioning day, but less on the importance of an energy demand. So you're going to use the aerobic system. You don't need a lot of carbs that day. It all
Yeah.
depends on your goals. So if you're trying to cut or get lean, you're going to have your high workout day be, okay, I'm going to take in a lot of carbs. I need the energy. But then on a non high intensity training day, you're going to not cut out carbs completely, which you can, but some people can uh, take away the carbs and minimize the carbs to maybe one serving that day. And the goal is to become metabolically flexible so that day you're cutting carbs, it doesn't mean you're cutting total amount of calories. You might drop your percent intake of total calories of carbs might be at, say, 30 to 40%, but on your days where you want to scale back down, it might be 20% less and you're getting more protein and more healthy fats in the diet. That's one way to do it. I don't know. Have you ever used that one or started that with a lot of people?
That's the one I did particularly when I was doing shows and kind of in that world for a little bit, and then I just watched Justin and Jerry do it a lot.
And it works. It is
Yeah,
the the big goal of that is just to become letting your I should say let your body use what it wants to and not really trying to feed the system on days that we're not using. So I think a lot of people get confused with carbohydrates. And what I mean when I say carbohydrates, I'm talking about starchy carbs. Your for anyone.
versus like just kind of empty, shitty carbs.
Well, no.
Yeah,
I consider that too. So like starchy carbs, and then your sugars, your bread, your pasta, any kind of processed food. I don't really consider vegetable carbs. We can break it down and get into the nitty gritty, but I think a lot of people think like, oh, if I can't eat carbs, I can't eat vegetables. I mean, to get a lot of
yeah,
carbohydrates
that's
from
not enough.
vegetables, you
Totally.
you got to eat a lot, and I mean a lot. People need vegetables and that nutrients and the fiber in that stuff. So I tell people, get rid of the carbohydrate source, starchy carbs, vegetables not included. This might be your and vegetables and berries. So raspberry, blueberries, those are I let people have a little bit. You can throw them on a salad. Stuff like bananas, fruits high in sugars, rices, potatoes, all that stuff kind of minimizes or brings it down on those days. And then there's days where you can cycle within the day, or you can say, okay, hey, if your workout's at, let's say, 11 a.m. and you're gonna wake up and you're gonna have some carbs prior to your workout because you know it's gonna be an intense workout, and then post workout in that time frame, and then at 2 o'clock you're gonna say, hey, I'm not gonna eat carbs for the rest of the day, and I'm gonna eat protein, fats, and vegetables. That's another way I kind of guide people to it. And depending on the person, you got to test it all on yourself. It works. You see some reduction in weight loss, or you become body fat percentage. You drop down. I've seen that happen with a lot of clients.
Yeah, it's I really haven't used the cycling that much with anybody other than someone who's just looking for just straight aesthetics, really. But it's a good point because I just wrote like kind of the name and what it's most used for. But yeah, that's a good point using it in those regards too.
And this one, this is the one that if people come to me and say that, hey, they want to lose weight, number one, and maybe this has changed over the years for me, but I think number one I tell them is reduce carbs greatly, and you'll lose weight, especially if
Oh,
you're
totally.
so. Love it for the cutting. It definitely works in the bodybuilding world, but I don't want to scare people because some people get into they're like, oh, that's bodybuilders do that, but I can't do that. But they're still consistently eating high carbohydrate, high fat, moderate protein diets, which research after research has shown that it's a lot of the processed and high carbohydrates is that's the issue with the diet. So
Yeah,
when I
just
tell people like,
overactive
okay,
levels of insulin, low or high levels of blood sugar, so insulin has to be released. Um, and yeah, you just aren't supposed to be consuming that much sugar, because what happens is your body's not going to get rid of it if it can't utilize it. It can't push any more into the muscle cell, because most times people don't utilize their muscle enough to have to replenish enough glycogen anyway. Your body's going to shovel all that sugar into a fat cell. So, losing weight, and I heard Peter Attia say this, he put it in a really good way. He said, do you want to make your fat cells smaller, or do you want to have less fat cells? If you want to have less fat cells, just go get liposuction. If you want to make your fat cells smaller, well, you're not talking about just like fat loss. You're talking about just metabolic regulation, because people are just metabolically broken, essentially. Like their body's doing things at the wrong time. It's putting the excess sugar in the fat at the wrong time. It's consuming too much sugar at the wrong time. So kind of like, I think overall this probably could be said about every tip, is something about it is about linking it with your lifestyle and finding the right pattern for your behavior and your activity levels.
Correct. And with that, it goes a long way, is the activity levels. People are listening. If you're overweight and you're not losing weight, or maybe you're not even active, carbohydrates really shouldn't be in your diet. And I know that's a hard thing for some people to hear, but because I know carbohydrates are a staple of what a lot of people like to go have with breakfast, lunch, dinner, or they like to kind of put it together.
But that's been imposed on us, and it just through habits.
Exactly.
And just because it was tasted really good and everyone wanted to do it, and that's what was promoted. But yeah, quite frankly, that glycogen loading, and that's actually one of my tips. So that's 2 tips. Glycogen loading, which is a tip in a certain regards, but it's actually not a benefit in this setting, right? Because
correct.
Even athletes, and I was going to mention this when we're going to mention the tip, and I'll get to the benefit later. But even in athletes, glycogen loading can cause people to become pre-diabetic. So it can, if you overdo it, you're just consuming way too many carbohydrates. And you don't need all that stuff. I mean, less than the human body is made up of less than 2% of the human body is made up of carbohydrates. Quite frankly, we create the sugars we need, molecules we need, with proteins and fats anyway. So I don't know. It's just pretty interesting. Like we have 2 ways of converting protein and fat into our primary fuel source. That's essentially what you're doing when you're trying to lose weight and you're eating carbohydrates. You're like pre-glycogen loading your whole body. And if you never expel that energy off, you keep eating at a surplus, you're not going to be able to lose the weight that you're trying to.
And that's the problem. And I kind of don't like that we're carb bashing, but I think you have to kind of go there. And what you said about, carbs kind of like.
No, it's unfair.
Right.
It's so unfair to blame the victim in this regards. I've just come to realize, I don't know, just carbs are.
But
excuse my language.
Yeah.
They're everywhere. They're just everywhere, and they're on every menu. You can't really avoid them, and that's why I don't eat out. I make everything at home, and it's just crazy.
For people listening, remember, we're talking carbs, a bad source of carbs or excess carbs, not
sugars, corn syrup, high fructose corn
pasta,
syrup,
breads, all that stuff. Even excess of rice, because that can still happen.
True.
But carbs can be very beneficial for our system, because we know that at the base, our body runs off of glucose, and we can take all substrates, or I should say all substrates, a lot of substrates of the metabolic pathways, and turn them back into glucose to run it.
But most of the most of the best carbohydrates are looked at as resistant starches.
Correct.
They're like a root vegetable, a sweet potato, yucca.
Oh yeah. No, but I totally on board with I agree that the whole, if you're having excess carbs, it's just going to go to, hey, boom, we're going to make gluconeogenesis. We're going to create more glucose. Well, if we have excess that, what are we going to do? We're going to store it as a triglyceride, and then we're
Yep.
building the fat cells. So it
And then
kind of
if you don't have enough, and that's when LDL becomes an important number, because if you don't have enough LDL, which are your triglyceride transporters, then they start flowing around freely in the blood. So some people can get away with a really shitty diet because they have a high HDL number and a good LDL number, and they have enough fat transporters essentially.
so that's the yeah, and that's the big thing is people have to understand it on a metabolic pathway that these carbs that they're taking in, but they're not using this for anything. They're not going out and hunting. They're not going out and finding their own food or foraging or traveling. That world is over. They're now sitting at a desk all day. Those carbs are doing absolutely nothing for them. Going to lead to more disease, more metabolic deficiencies, and more problems down the line.
Yeah, yeah. So let's get back to another tip.
Would you say glycogen loading? Are we going with that one?
Well, okay. So let's finish that one off. So the benefit to glycogen loading, and I think it should be used basically the night before, or and I've heard it used even in endurance athletes in the night before, but the night before and the morning of, essentially having a higher level of resistant starches and starches in general, sugars, what have you, fast energy, quick absorption, doesn't require too much energy for digesting, excuse me. Um, and you can have longer sets in your performance at the gym. You can improve in your volume. You can improve your peak performance duration. And I even heard on Joe Rogan's podcast, I forget the gentleman's name, but he ran the 100 miles in the record time, and he talked about you know how he eats the night before to help improve his glycogen performance the day of the race. So there's definitely different ways to do it depending on the sport or athletic event you're doing. But there is benefits to glycogen loading for performance.
Totally. And this is going to be your immediate gas tank. Your muscles store about 300 to 400 grams of glycogen. Liver's about 100, and what it's
And you're like putting an extended clip on.
yeah. So
on
what you're doing is after you eat these carbohydrates, you're taking these glucose molecules. Yeah, you're going to use them, but your body's saying, "Hey, we need to have energy source for tomorrow." So it puts it long process. It puts it and synthesizes it into this bigger molecule that can be stored and released for more energy. So it's basically just readily available right in the muscles when you're breaking down storage form of
but
glucose.
but if you're not um, seasoned, like if you're not someone who's been got yourself through 2 weeks of your own quote unquote preseason and are in like a training area or not area training segment kind of in your weeks and in your months, it's not something that just like the lay person should do, because you're going to risk weight gain and then high insulin levels and stuff like
Yeah,
that. All negatives. So that's why I was going to say that one towards the end, because it's kind of dicey and it takes definitely the right person with the right activity levels and consistency
right.
for that to be a benefit and not a bad.
Yeah, you have to be
tip.
working out hard, practicing hard, lifting very hard. This isn't your average person who goes to the gym 2 to 3
And
times.
it can't just be day 3 of you starting your routine.
Right. Play around with it, and obviously, if you do want to do that. Obviously, add good source of carbohydrates. There's no sense of adding bad fuel, like you said, to the system. It won't do anything.
Well, I'm gonna keep going down the line over here because I have 8
Fire
listed,
away.
and my number 2 is time restricted eating. So going through feast and famine cycles, and this can be used in a couple different ways for nutritional biochemistry. Um, you can lose weight with time restricted eating because You are improving the length of time that your body gets to digest and process all that food, and all that energy, so to speak. And then typically, what you're also doing is you're freeing up the blood, for digestion in your first REM cycle. And in your first REM cycle, your body does a lot of cleaning, different inflammation in the body, particularly in the brain. So you are going to improve the next day's cognitive performance and physical performance, especially in the gym and in any other work related need for you to perform. Oh, and also if you're looking to use it as a way to, um, keep strength up and keep adding muscle, it actually improves your IGF-1 release the next time you go eat, essentially. So it's like feast famine cycles of keeping your meals between 6 hours, time restricted eating. You eat all your food within typically 6 to 8 hour window has worked best in what, I've seen some of my clients do.
Now,
I got a guy actually who he's almost 40, and he's been gaining about a pound and a half, um, every week and a half, 2 weeks on average. Still just added muscle, and he does a lot of like time restricted eating, and then like low carb days, and just a lot of heavy eating on the other
so
days.
when he came to you and you first explained this time restricted eating to him, what kind of was his reaction, and how did you kind of set up his time restricted eating windows?
Well, first it just was, um, kind of the best thing that worked for him, because we were also trying to improve his mobility. He wanted to lean out a little bit, and just with his work schedule, he just wasn't able to get all his food in. Um, and then from there, we just kind of took that window and we would move it like on the weekends, say, where he could like wake up and have a bunch of food in the morning, a bunch of food in the middle of the day, and cut it off early, because that actually improved the way that he lifted the next morning. And then he started getting in the habit of kind of eating midday to early evening. So it's like became his window. But yeah, I think it just I remember also like trying a couple things at the beginning that just didn't work too. It's just trial and error. I think the hardest thing for people, which wasn't really an issue for him, but just getting it down to that first window. So I would say even telling people at first like a 12-hour window is difficult, right? Like they get up, they start eating at like 5:30, 6 a.m. They have they have their protein shake or something, right? And then they still have like a couple snacks after dinner, like watching a movie, chilling out after they got the kids to bed around like 8 or 9. So you're burning the candle from both ends there. And his goal became more just about weight gain than mobility and definition right now anyway. So, um,
By waking
after we had, after we had already kind of got it established that we could get it restricted and do that, he went back to eating in those windows with a much better, kind of understanding and baseline of where his body was at, so he doesn't get to the point where, oh, we gotta really take a hit to this. So I think some people also forget that a lot of these tips are things that you have in your toolbox, and you pull one out and you use it for a little bit, you throw it back in and pull another one out. So I think what's scary at first for people too is think that like, holy shit, how am I going to go without my morning shake? Holy shit, how am I going to go without my dessert after dinner? Like, I start eating dinner at like 7 or 8 o'clock anyway, and then I gotta get the kids ready for bed, and then I finish my dinner by like 9 or 10 once I'm done cleaning up, right? So it's difficult for people to fathom like kind of these changes all at once, and forever, right? People think that they have to do this forever if they want the success. So
crash
I think
course.
that's what's cool about some of this stuff, is that you can implement it, you can see the results with it, and then you can go from there.
And that's, I mean, I think we'll talk about it this end. The best thing of why we're we're kind of going along the lines of why they're tweaks and how to program these tweaks in, say, a 4 week program or a 4 week month period where you might be doing one tweak week one and then you add the tweaks. It's not like you take them all together, boom, do it, go. And there's some people that will be able to do it, and I applaud them. Like, go do it. I wish a lot of people could, but we know that behavior change is something that's very tough. And tweak,
Yeah,
small
but I've
tweaks
seen those people
each
who
week.
I've seen those people who do it too much and they burn themselves out and then they ultimately go back to their old ways and they don't want to go back to what they were doing because they were too strict on themselves. They found something that worked and they literally got addicted to what was working and lost sight of the process and overdid it, and then they kind of fall off. So I think it is important to know that a lot of this stuff, even by doctors, isn't recommended to do
Right?
forever.
Cycle it. Have fun with it.
Exactly.
Different parts of the year, do different things. For
Yeah, like one major one that actually isn't really a tip, but Gundry talks a lot about is the 365-day growth cycle. So, all right, maybe this is one of my tips that I wrote out. I said cut out animal proteins,
ooh,
and the reason is because mTOR, and once mTOR is activated, you're increasing growth on all cells, and hormones, growth factors release, insulin-like growth factors release, and since that on switch is on, all the cells are being told eat. And since we already have, like what we talked about earlier, kind of a heavier carb based diet, we have sugar flowing freely all through our system. And when all cells are told to eat, that means good cells and bad cells. So a lot of cancer growth in that period. So the reason Gundry attributes a lot of health problems is to this 365-day growth cycle where we eat fruit that's not in season in our local area all year long. And we're getting high levels of fructose and sugars in general all year long, along with mTOR, animal protein, all year long. So all year long, all cells are told to grow. We get inflammation, we get more headaches, we don't sleep well, we have weight gain, we get bad blood flow, blood clots. It leads to a lot of heart failure, heart disease, stroke, and you get inflammation in the brain, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and obviously you burn through your type 2 receptors, so now you have diabetes. So one little tip along with the cut out animal protein sometimes is because you are basically turning off that signal to grow, and you allow for periods of autophagy, times that you're fasting, or times that you're using the sauna or exercising or improving cellular repair and cellular recycling, that your body will start to get rid of some of these diseased precancerous cells, because cancer is just a damaged cell that ends up in dysplasia, and the cell replicates itself.
I'm glad you brought that up because this is where me and you kind of, I don't say divide, but we get a little back and forth. So
Okay. All right. I
one of
like
my
it.
tips was actually to
Eat fruit all
no,
year
it's not the
long.
fruit, it's the protein. I definitely agree with the fruit, in especially you have to look at where people kind of migrated from. So obviously my heritage is more European, Eastern European. That's going to be a completely different genetic profile, say, than people who lived in the South Pacific Islands or the Polynesians, where there's different array of bioavailability of fruits, vegetables. Does that mean that I might not be really good at taking in certain fruits at certain times of year because my body's not used to that? Where they might be like, hey, year round, because it's so climatized, and they can, maybe they're more able to break that down. So I think obviously that I don't want to get too deep into that, but that goes down a long line of kind of research and kind of the gut genome and different genetics separate.
Well, I think the other side that I'm more trying to stress here is just the fact that when we have an animal source protein, mTOR is activated, which is telling all cells to grow. So the tip is basically like go through a period of cutting out animal sourced protein or just protein in general and have like a couple days here and there, or maybe you go 1 week out of the year where you don't have animal protein.
Yes, and that's where I don't want to say it's there's I'm against it or on the other side of it. I I want to look at all the options. So the interesting thing I was actually reading up on in right 100% on the mTOR, all of it. The biggest issue I was reading up on some research the other day was it's combined with certain diets, you can minimize the effect of that, of the mTOR in the cellular process.
Interesting.
So where you're all correct is like mTOR is like upregulate cell growth, all that. So if you're having your standard American diet where it's, hey, I'm going to have this cheeseburger with fries. Now we already know the fries are carbohydrates that are cooked in fat that are already a oxidized, unhealthy combination. And then let's look, oh, you have a burger with high protein and then you have high carbohydrates. The big issue with the mTOR I was reading is it upregulates, and we don't want to be mTOR upregulated 24/7. That's not good. Everything in the body's got to be cycled. We like autophagy. We like mTOR regulation. We need bones and muscles and neurons to grow, but we need bad ones to die. And this is where we're seeing this cancer because our body doesn't know what to do. We'll get to that in a sec. So the biggest thing that I was reading and someone says like carbs are the predominantly big problem when it comes to mTOR because all that insulin, glucose, that's what this cancer is feeding off of.
Right.
That's what's upregulating. So when he says, protein's not really good or it's bad, he does have a valid point. If you're a person that is already prone to issues or obese and type 2 diabetic, protein's not going to be your answer on that one. Now, on the other side, you do need protein for muscle mass and everything else. And that's where one of my tips is actually to add more protein with a balance.
But you actually, one thing that people really don't mention all that often is that you actually recycle about 20% of your protein daily. So we don't need as much protein as we really think. And kind of like historically speaking, we didn't necessarily always catch an animal to consume
Right.
all the time, and we would have to go through periods of just like eating and not eating. We go through feast or famine cycles. We go through the catch to having to gather a little bit more, and I think kind of what you had just said, like it's good to kind of balance things out. And I think that's kind of the main point is like, it's not that animal protein's bad, although to one of your points about how there's ways to mitigate the negative, I can understand that because a lot of the literature around the carnivore diet is about that, eating the animal nose to tail and having a lot of compounds in the animal itself, whether it's in its cartilage or organs or what else, that mitigate the negative part from the mTOR or growing these negative cells or these bad cells. And I think just kind of along with that, because I've heard the arguments for why we should eat meat all the time, every single meal, all day, every day, inevitably. I've also heard the arguments for why we should eat vegetables or leafy greens and nothing from an animal or bug or anything, right? The complete opposite side for all our dying days, right? And I think the whole idea is that they're both right in their contexts, but extremism is never the right answer, and it's always about kind of how how it can best balance it into your life. And I totally see in American culture this idea that every meal has to be circulated around this protein. And quite frankly, most of us don't even have the activity levels. Most of the American population doesn't have the activity levels to require all that protein. And if you're recycling 20% daily, then what you're doing with all that excess protein is breaking it down to sugar and storing it as fat anyway. So I think a lot of people don't need more protein. And I would give the quick tip of nutritional biochemistry cutting out mTOR, because I could say cut out carbs. That was one of the tips already. That's one of the first ones we said. And that's actually kind of hard for people to do anyway. But I also am saying cut out animal protein here and there, throw it into the juggling act of your nutritional balance, because I see the larger benefits to the U.S. population, especially.
Yeah, well, this is always, and I love that we're kind of back and forth on this, and I think it's good because we see kind of both sides and I totally agree. Like every once in a while, you can live without protein. You can go without protein.
Just like you can go without eating, or just like you can go.
But I think a lot of times, and I know you said that protein metabolically broken down, it can get stored as fat, unless. And I know we're talking situation, unless that if a person is, say they're on a higher protein, higher fat, lower carbohydrate diet, and say they're cycling the carbohydrates, the protein won't get stored as fat if there's no excess. If there's excess protein, it'll just run the metabolic pathway. And what's cool about our human body is everything is going to go back to make glucose. So we can take amino acids, we can break them down, we can run them reverse up the process of glycolysis to make glucose and glycogen. So you can get glycogen restoration with protein. And that's where I think I feel a lot of people get turned off by protein because they think it's very bad. Where as of numbers of last year, the mean protein intake for men was 16%. For women, it was 15.6.
The devil's in the details, because the majority of people consuming their protein usually isn't the best source.
And I can agree with, hey, if you're eating burgers and crappy sources of protein, cut it out. The opposite side I was reading is mean carbohydrate intake for men was 47.4% and 49.6% for women. That's almost 50% of the average intake is carbohydrates. So I know we're looking at protein as like this bad thing with mTOR. Yeah, in the right combination, this thing can be very bad. But if we're kind of playing this game, and the carnivore diet shows this, we can have protein and vegetables and be fine. It's just like you can't add, ammonia and bleach together. It's not good. But I do with the mTOR and the autophagy, there's a lot of back and forth, because I also read research that too much autophagy or dysregulation of autophagy can actually increase cancer, which I was like, really? So I think you definitely have to cycle between, hey, you have to grow good cells with mTOR, but you can't go crazy. But then at the same time, you have to have autophagy to kill out the bad cells.
So that's the exact point of the tip, is basically don't eat animal protein 365 days.
You want to know one cool thing I read about mTOR complex 1. So mTOR complex 1 is the main one that's going to that's going to facilitate growth and cell development, all that stuff. mTOR 1 or complex 1 is inhibited in the liver and fat by exercise, and that may underline some of the health benefits in these tissues. So think about that. When you're exercising and you're increasing mTOR complex 1, you're increasing it in the muscle mass, in the skeletal muscle, which is a great organ, but is inhibited in the liver and the fat. And what we know through research is fat is basically its own endocrine cell. It can secrete hormones. So a big thing right there is, yes, mTOR can be bad, but we can mitigate that. exercise is by far one of the best things you can do, and it shows that.
I like it. I like it. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, do you get that? I was kind of like shocked. I was like, oh, I didn't fully get that or know that it inhibited liver and fat. So it's like, okay, now we're talking a
but you said
different
mTOR
kind
one,
of
so that means
game.
is there another mTOR?
So there's two mTOR complexes. mTOR complex one, which is our normal, okay, cell growth, all that stuff. That's when we're talking mTOR. Most people are talking mTOR complex one. mTOR complex two is a little bit different. That's more of a on the other side of things. It's actually it's good to have that. It's not like upregulate cells. It's a little bit different
And
pathway.
did the study say what kind of exercise was was restricting mTOR or blocking
If it
mTOR?
was blocking, it just said exercise in general. So
And
any sort of movement. So
is that while you're exercising or is that post as well?
it didn't say pre or post. So I assume that
It's just during,
after
probably.
exercise, it's probably during, and then there's going to be an hour or two afterwards
Well, you're
where
recovering and
it's
probably not
elevated
activated.
and then it drops. Because
Yeah.
we've seen that during certain exercise, you can kick in autophagy
And
if you're
would
in
you
certain
say that
states.
most people are eating 3 meals a day and they're eating animal protein every single meal and that they would seriously see great benefits? You can't deny that they would see if someone ate animal protein 3 times a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, that they would not see benefits if they just cut out animal protein for a week.
Would I think they wouldn't see benefits?
Yeah, would you say that they would see benefits?
What kind of benefits? I would agree. Weight loss,
I would think some associated to weight loss.
yeah, absolutely. But like I think it's not just a simple take protein out and you have weight loss. I think it's
No, but I think it's one nutritional tweak and tip that I'm including because it's I've seen it work for short period implements for people, and I've seen other people who use it all the time. So I've seen it on both ends. I've seen people use it as a tip, and I've seen people who live like that, and I've seen people who still get great benefits. That the body would has ways of getting things done.
and let's flip that. Now, say that this person is eating 50% carbohydrate, 40% fats, and about 10% protein. They're not getting enough protein in their diet because we do need some
Amino
amino
acids that
acids
we
in
can't
our
get.
in our
Totally,
world. We can't
totally.
recycle everything. So on the other side, and
Because
I maybe
because
should have
if
said this.
I'm
The other
talking
side,
to a vegan, which I'm not, Danny's not a vegan. Remember, what I'm
right?
talking about.
Yeah,
If I was talking to a vegan, I would say adding animal protein once a week, right? Because that tweak, that little tiny tweak to their system that's so used to this one way, would be a profound change. Same thing with the
yes.
opposite with people who eat all protein all the time, just cutting it out, letting the body kind of work with what it already got. Like you're on a backloaded scheduling system there. You're delivering it before it's needed. So letting
Yeah,
it catch up, so to speak, does a world of benefits for the systems in general. And just like
and that's
realigning it,
true. Yeah,
Walter Longo talks about the clocks of metabolism and different processes in the body and just how they can sync up or not sync up. And when they don't sync up, think of like a traffic jam. I think of like 93.
but and that's the cool thing because it's just there's a lot of one scenario fits all, but a lot of them aren't.
Right.
So with protein, we've all heard like okay, if you add some protein, we have thermogenesis. So 20 to 30% cost to absorb and break down the protein, which is very good. So you're gonna if you have take 100 calories in, you're gonna take 30 of those calories to burn the protein. Where fats are about 5 to 10% thermogenesis, where you're not getting much, and then fat is probably 1 to 3%, which is minimal. So that definitely plays a big role when I tell people, okay, I think I want you to add some protein because I don't think you're getting enough. And it also plays in with our big friend leptin, which we talked about in the beginning, is that satiated feeling, or we can eat this and feel more satiated. We can suppress that ghrelin, that hunger related, and this overeating. The other big thing that I like it for, obviously promoting healthy bone growth, muscle growth, it prevents sarcopenia, is the loss of muscle mass. But sometimes eating protein, get that satiated feeling. People actually start eating less and they don't even realize it, because it's not the protein. It's that because they're changing something on their plate. So I know a lot of
Totally.
Is it Sissons that it's more plants than anything?
Well,
Is that correct?
I think he. Yeah, well, I mean, I think
Maybe that's good. There's one
a
author
lot of
that says,
a lot of the big names like that promote a good healthy ratio of greens and vegetables.
so all plants and veggies and some protein, and a lot of that is just big changing it, just changing some stuff up.
Right,
And
just taking a
once you
step,
get that,
just taking a step, doing a tweak, trying one, going on to another tweak, and then figuring out kind of a lifestyle and a balance that works with your activity levels and kind of how you want to eat and what you want to eat, and some of that all needs to be adjusted. So, um,
no, I think it's great, and
I
I
think
like that we go back and forth on the protein. I know
I agree, and I like that we're diving into conversations on these, and we're at about 58 minutes here, and I got about 4 left. I think we should do a part 2 on this.
we're definitely gonna have to do a part two, maybe even part three, because I got a list over here.
Oh, jeez. All right. Hold
But
on.
I
Cross
definitely
off
think
the
it's
ones I got to. Carb cycling, time restricted eating, glycogen
glycogen.
loading, and cut out animal.
But yeah, that's a big thing, because they're tweaks, but they're not just things that you can say, okay, just do this. Here's a sentence. Like, go back.
No, they all have a
There's
different specific reason that you're doing
yeah,
this tweak and benefit that you're going after and different way to implement it.
there's so much in between, and I'm kind of not. I mean, I don't want to like say no, you're wrong, because I mean, we're never wrong.
No,
You
none of
know,
this is wrong.
and I always know when I bring
And I'm
up
never
protein,
wrong.
he's like, okay, he's gonna mTOR me, and I'm like, yeah, damn, he's got me there a little bit. But kind of what I like is you challenge me, because I got to dig deeper into more of this process and dive into more of autophagy and mTOR and really get into the science behind it. And it's really cool when you get there. And a lot of the research, I've read is they're just like clipping the iceberg on this one. They're still trying to develop and figure out how this thing runs as a system, especially when you throw cancer involved, that it becomes this just absolute mess. So that's definitely going to be an ongoing research. You're going to hear probably back and forth.
Totally.
There's a lot of good stuff on both sides. But if you're a general population, if you're just our normal person, I'm going to have to agree with you, Matt, on this one. Like, you got to minimize your animal protein, or make sure you're getting it good quality source. And here and there, you're probably not a high-end athlete that needs crazy amounts of protein. Some people need it. I like more of it to keep more muscle mass on. Obviously, I don't go out and eat crappy carbs. My carbs are very much sweet potato and some resistant starch white rice. Other than that, it's pretty clean eating, healthy fats, and good sourced protein.
Well, I think that's a good place to cut it off here, because I got 4 left on my list, and I don't want to.
I like it.
I mean, I'll probably end up adding more to that if we have more time to think of these. Because it's a good way to segue into a part 2 on this whole topic, because we really did go into depth. I'm happy about it. So that's it for this week, and stay tuned for a part 2 on tips, nutritional biochemistry tips.